After humanity forced the Columbra workers to leave the system, they immediately began to fortify. Multiple stations were brought in segmented pieces. Each segment was methodically combined to create a complete station within 44 hours. While that was happening, massive ships arrived in the systems that did not look like warcraft at all, mainly because they weren't. These massive ships slowly and methodically lowered themselves onto several planets in the systems. As they did, other large ships that came with them sent out thousands of worker drones. These large drones are sent out with a single purpose in mind. Once they are on the ground, the massive ships that have landed begin to emit certain gases from the vents along their port and starboard sides. Along with that, strange appendages seem to come out of the ship. These appendages look almost like insect legs as they come out from all sides and pierce into the planet's surface, the ends of them drilling down in deep 10 to 20 meters, stopping either when they hit the depth limit that they wanted to, or they simply hit solid rock. These legs would then start pumping a slurry of sewage water into the ground, along with additional water just to clean the pipes out at the end. While this is happening, the worker drones in space seek out any stray meteor and drop it onto the planet's surface. The worker drones would seemingly fight over who could get their claws on the largest chunks of ice that they could. When dropping onto the planet, the rocks simply crashed into the planet with a massive thump. Eventually, though, they began to burn on the way down. With enough debris and gases in the air, there was now enough atmosphere strong enough to make these giant chunks of ice rocks explode before reaching the planet. Though it would be nearly 6 months before the atmosphere was actually breathable, with the addition of these pieces of ice, it was growing. The melted ice also created water, and once the ground was moist enough, cyanobacteria, or algae, was simply released next to the ship. Unfortunately, this was just stage 1. In space, the battle group spread out to check out for traps and survivors. They all started setting up a few of their own, of course, just in case. The standard mine doesn't look like anything more than a lone piece of rock, using the local materials to camouflage it. If you didn't know exactly what to scan for, you would miss it completely. Under the shell, the mine actually looks like an omnidirectional sea urchin. Each of the spikes made out of depleted uranium and uses a nuclear device as thrust. The low-yield nuke is used for multiple effects in this regard, as it's used as propellant for the spikes, as well as putting up a cloud of electromagnetic radiation. This resulting EM pulse would be enough to scramble the enemy sensor arrays, at least for a while. Then, of course, if they're close enough, there's the resulting thermal damage as well. Through this entire process, space was quiet, almost too quiet. And this puts humans on edge. They don't like things too quiet, but they had to simply sit there and do their job. As the ships on the planet already were starting to reach stage 3 of their terraforming, there was a sudden burst of energy from the edge of the sector. Against the black was an entire fleet of Columbra ships. All human ships immediately pulled back to pre-sighted locations, mainly to protect the stations. Everyone had sounded general quarters the moment the Columbra ships arrived, and the humans tried the data pulse, but unfortunately, the Columbra ships seemed unaffected. The captain aboard the cruiser hailed the upcoming enemy and said, "This is human territory. State your intentions." The Columbra ships didn't respond for a total of 17 minutes. They just continued to advance. When they did finally send a transmission, what was translated came out as such:
"We have seen through your deception, humans. You will now return to your rightful place as our cattle. Surrender now, and we may not destroy your homeworld.
With this, the captain simply looked at his XO, nodded to his communications officer, and they opened up a large broadcast. Well, they came to party, which told every ship to get ready to go into offensive operations. And as the final ship got into position, the captain gave this order: Party time! Everybody dance! With this, the heat of battle kicked off once again. Torpedoes and drones are immediately launched from the human side. The armored torpedoes streak across space towards their target as the turrets align themselves, trying to get that perfect shot. And as the torpedoes reach 87% on their way to target, the main coil guns are fired. This will create a time on target scenario with the main gun round striking the front of the enemy formation 7 seconds prior to the torpedo's impact. The enemy fleet, before this happened, deployed their fighters and their own torpedoes. Even with the Columbra forces outnumbering the human forces seemingly 3 to 1, the effective range and rate of fire of the human makes it an even fight. This slug match will definitely come down to who has the best tactics and not just the best weapons. The enemy fighters try to destroy the human torpedoes as they come in and quickly find out that they're a whole lot more difficult and destroyed than they look. A Columbra fighter's point defense cannons are far too weak to penetrate the outer shell, and the direct fire weapons only knock the torpedoes off course, usually just temporarily. If they do score a kill, the shrapnel from the torpedo is devastating as it strikes the fighter. Trying to intercept the second wave of torpedoes, the fighters bank in and end up getting struck by the massive main gun rods that are streaking through space. Even if they can dodge those rods flying at 77% the speed of light, there's another problem. Human drones have arrived and they start to tear into the Columbra fighters and they rip them apart piecemeal. The smaller size of the drones makes them difficult to target at best. Also, the drones maneuver with amazing speed as there is no pilot trying to handle G-forces. To rub salt into an open wound, each drone is equipped with 8 anti-drone/fighter missiles. These missiles are hardly strong enough to go through a ship's hull, but they're more than enough to take out a small craft like a fighter or a drone. The Columbra leadership can only watch as their entire fighter wing is annihilated in less than a minute, though they have one more thing to worry about than that. With the amount of torpedoes the Columbra point defenses have to deal with is beyond what their system can even handle, primarily due to the ships constantly maneuvering, trying to avoid the main gun rounds that are coming in. The Columbra helmsmen have to do excessive amounts of maneuvering due to the humans firing again and again at their ships. It seems as though as soon as the ship begins to evade from the previous shot, the humans can calculate where the ship's going to be and simply fire again, forcing a separate maneuver. The inertial dampeners on the Columbra ships are far beyond their limits, and the crew is being tossed around inside the ship. Most have already coiled themselves around their battle stations, yet they're still being moved from one direction to another quite violently. It's getting so bad that floating projectile vomit has become a common sight aboard the ships at this moment. Seeing the fighter wing has been wiped out completely, and knowing that they will need the point defenses to shoot down the drones, a few of the smarter captains adjust their tactics. Against orders, they begin to target the human torpedoes with their own torpedoes. Those that did not adjust their tactics quickly found themselves overwhelmed and being penetrated before the massive explosion inside blew the back out of their ships. On the human side, everything was quite calm. With the enemy fighters completely dispatched, they only had to deal with the Columbra torpedoes. Human point defense cannons barely got a workout as the tertiary guns could take out a torpedo with a single hit. The Columbra torpedoes are much slower, not armored at all, and much, much larger. making them far easier to hit. Automated systems from the coil guns and torpedo launchers meant that most of the crew was very hands off. They realized that they were in the middle of a battle, but those below deck simply had to monitor the process to make sure everything went smoothly. On the bridge of every human ship, their respective captains gave their orders, immediately echoed by the XO, and every crewman fully fixated on their station executed this without hesitation. Outside, it is clear to see that the human fleet didn't even break formation much, though they didn't have to, as it seems the Columbra either didn't have main batteries or the humans were outside their effective range. One seemingly whipped through the formation and actually got sucked into one of the northern poles of some of the planets, but aside from that, they didn't have much to worry about. The only true movement from the humans is that they were continuously moving forward as one giant death spitting wall. The Columbra formation began to break quickly as more and more ships fell prey to the human onslaught. Seeing their fleet's flagship get perforated multiple times before the torpedoes ripped it into pieces was enough for most of the rest of the fleet to say, "Fuck this," and make a break for it. Most didn't get far, as the increased fire from the humans tore them a new one as they tried to get away. By the time the first one of the Caldera had been able to jump away, over 89% of the Columbia fleet had been completely lost. A few had actually overloaded their damaged engines in a desperate attempt to try and jump. The resulting debris field made it almost impossible to jump as the ships were being peppered by large pieces of rubble from their own fleet. When the last Scalubra ship in the system that was unable to make the jump away finally went to dark, the humans just kind of looked at each other, saying, "Was that it?" The few Columbra ships that escaped were all thinking the same thing. "I'll get you next time, human. Next time." Upon receiving word that a house had gone to face off against the humans alone, the great High Grand Leader was more than beyond angry. He cursed their representatives out so much that even his multitude of secretaries could not understand his words, especially between the hissing, the spitting, and slamming of his tail and the beating of his hands on the desk. Throughout the rest of the month, there began to show a true divide amongst the houses. Some wanted to marshal all of the Columbra forces and simply overrun the humans with number, and then, as they put it, feasting on those remaining, as a few of us can still taste the fear of a human as they simply slid down our gullet, still kicking as the humans slowly suffocated inside our stomach, the last burst of life fading, releasing an amount of hypnotic chemicals. Oh, the sensation. Other houses, usually smaller ones, had no interest in throwing away the lives of their underlings, especially since they had just received many members of their own house back. These houses, again mainly smaller ones, would have been overruled in a vote if not for one reason. The great High Grand Leader raised himself above all and proclaimed that no further action will be taken until I get more information. You will all await my decision. And that decision could change the course of two species that stretch across the universe. Aboard the human flagship, the fleet admiral is getting briefed on the outcome of the battle. He listened very closely, reviewed all the information, and after the briefing was complete, he said, "Interesting." And they didn't even get a chance to use those minds. Huh. Maybe next time.